recently working as lobbyists for the Organic Farmers Association Governing Council. And I don't know, was it about a year ago, Patty?
Started in January. Yeah.
Anyway.
It's been the longest year ever, but not quite a year.
OFA needed to hire a new lobbyist, and Patty came very highly recommended from several different groups, particularly because she was familiar with the issues around organic and sustainable agriculture. And, you know, there's lots of competent lobbyists on the Hill, but not everybody has a deeper understanding of organic farming. And so she's been not only helpful in informing us about goings on in policy, but also trying to light a fire under some of us to get active when it makes sense. And sometimes it's easy for farmers to slip into other things. So anyway, and also I have found it helpful to listen to Patty in some of these meetings because she's able to put the ag issues in the broader political context better than some of us are equipped to do. And so that's often useful. Anyway, have at it, Patty, and thank you very much for giving us an update from your perspective.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. So, because we have a small group, I think if you have a question, just fire away, and I'll try to take breaks because I have a tendency to like load a lot in there. Becky will tell you. So
it reminds me, I'm going to go grab my notebook to write some notes.
I'll try to build in some pauses and feel free to ask questions as I'm going along because we have a small group. And I have I just kind of have 3 chunks I was going to do. I was going to talk a little bit about who OFA is, although several of you on this call are quite familiar, I think, because you were there in the beginning days and are active now. So just a little bit of background on who OFA is and kind of how we fit, because there's lots of groups doing different policy things. And then I was going to try to spend some time on just like, what are we dealing with right now? There's a lot going on in the world of policy. And then this may or may not be the most useful for all of you. You all might be veterans, but I do have a kind of section at the end that we've been using to try to get people to be more involved and say it's not just for me to, as OFA's lobbyists, to talk to elected officials. We need organic farmers talking to elected officials. So I kind of have my little pep talk at the end about how we can do that, the kind of the 101 steps of how everybody can get involved. And we're doing it this time of year, and I'm actually making pitches to, since everybody's winter conference is now online, we're trying to do this at a lot of the winter farming conferences to kind of give this pitch to get organic farmers talking to policymakers. So we're going to do it in, I think at this point we'll do it in at the Ohio conference. I think I just heard back from Massachusetts, and we have a couple more out there. So we're trying to kind of get around this winter to get more organic farmers like feeling ready to go to be advocates, because you're the most experts we have, right? Because you're living it. So I just have some slides. You will see I'm a better lobbyist than I am a slide maker, but it's something to look at besides me. So I'm going to try this and see if it works. So this is just some pictures to look at as we go along. And again, feel free as I'm going, if you have questions, just shout them out. So Organic Farmers Association is actually relatively new. I think, Bob, you were probably involved about 5 years ago when people started having conversations to say we need a specific group to bring the interests of organic farmers together. And those conversations
before that too.
What was that?
And there's work 5 years before that also.
Yeah, exactly. I've heard these conversations on this happening on the side for a long time, right? But I think our official history says 2014. People started to get together to say, you know, we need to form this group. And in 2016, or OFA came to be. So we're a couple of years old. We're growing all the time. So Becky is involved in the governing council. Nate Pell-Palm is involved in the governing council. And MOA is a member of OFA. So you all are well represented, which is great, which is good to have. And we're trying to really make sure that we have people from all over the country to make sure we're not missing something, right? Because we know that needs, we have a lot of things in common, but we know that needs can shift based on region too. Oh, there we go. I'm just looking at the chat, sorry. So we have, let me make sure this is gonna work for me. what's happening. Let me go back. There we go. So we have, there's a lot of thought that went into this, and the people that convened OFA in the beginning to make sure that OFA was a place for farmers' needs to be met. There's lots of folks that kind of convene, you know, multi-stakeholder conversations for organic, and that's all great, but OFA wanted to really make sure that farmers' voices were fully represented. So we work closely with state groups, regional groups, national organizations, but when it comes to setting the policies and who's, you know, voting and guiding the activities of OFA, our goal is really to make sure that that is certified organic farmers. So we have a policy, there's a governing council, and then we also have a policy committee, and I just put this up to kind of show how deliberate the thought was to make sure they're thinking about different parts of the country. So there's regional seats for farmer representatives who are the voting members of the policy committee, and then farm organizations who are on the committee but don't vote. And then they do it by region to make sure we're not missing something, all the way to the point of when we vote on policy priorities, things have to pass by a certain margin, I think 60% in 2/3 of the regions, to make sure we're not in a situation where one part of the country is kind of dominating the process over another. That was given a lot of thought, and it does show up in a kind of our daily practice to make sure that we're thinking about it. And so we do have a process every year. Similar, it sounds similar to what you all are doing now, where people can propose policy positions, and then farmer members will vote on them. We have a process through the spring where they get edited, and the policy committee moves them along, and then the membership ultimately votes on them. And then we also ask people to set kind of our top priorities, because there's a million things we could work on. We could have policy positions on those things. But when it comes down to, you know, our day-to-day resources, what are our top priorities? So this just shows you that since we've started that process, there's been a couple big themes for the folks who are voting and saying what our priorities should be. And they come down to what we kind of talk about is the organic standards, organic integrity. You know, how is the USDA doing in protecting this label and making sure it's backed up by meaningful standards? Because we think the whole thing really rests on that it's a credible label that people see as a high integrity label. The issue of imports in particular and the potential for fraud has always been on the list. Hydroponic operation has been on the list for the whole time. It's shifted places a little bit, and this year it was always kind of like just missing the top 5, and this year it kind of entered the top 5. And then another perennial in the time that we've been doing this is a specific set of standards and enforcement problems we have, which is organic dairy, which has its own set of issues that we need the USDA to be better at. So this is kind of, for me as a policy person for the group, you know, there are daily choices to make about what time we have, you know, and the problems before us and what we put our resources towards. And this is a guide for doing that. We have lots of other policy positions, which is also useful because something might pop up. There's an opportunity. It may not be one of these top 5 priorities, but if people have spoken and said, you know, we have the position that we want to really, you know, see improvement on genetic contamination in the organic seed system, and there's an opportunity for us to, you know, join in on something like that and endorse it, or do something, you know, without a lot of effort that helps move that ball, and we have policy on it. It helps me know that it's okay for me to do that, which I suspect is how you guys use your policy positions too. So in terms of, you know, we had those priorities for the year, and we started off 2020 with that list of priorities, ready to go, move them all forward. And then 2020 became 2020, right? Which is the year where most plans got thrown out the window. So I'm gonna give a little bit of detail of all of these, and feel free to ask questions or throw in other updates or whatever, because this is kind of what we're working with at this point. Obviously, the thing that is really dominating almost everything at this point is the pandemic. We had other plans for the year of doing more affirmative things on our big priority issues. We also were really watching the immigration process, especially for farm labor. If you had asked me in January what I was going to spend time on this year, I would have said we would have spent more time on that, because that train was moving. And lots of other things have happened instead. So in terms of the pandemic response, I'm not sure how much detail to get into, so I'll just kind of tee it up and people can ask questions if they want. So early on, in kind of the first couple months of it, agriculture was very much in the mix, right? The meat processing system broke down. I know you all are very familiar with that because you're living through it like everybody else. Supply chain interruptions. What do you do with all this product that's backed up because it can no longer go to food service, or it's no longer, restaurants aren't running. So we kind of saw that through the spring and even into the summer. It was front page news. We did have some response from Congress with that CARES Act early on. And then the CARES Act put a lot of money, like a really big pot of money, in the hands of USDA with a lot of discretion about how they should spend it. The section of the bill in the CARES Act about how the USDA should spend billions of dollars was really a couple paragraphs long and gave them a lot of leeway. And so they went ahead and set up two main areas of how they were going to spend that money. So there's essentially a direct payment program. We are now in round 2 of that. So that's called the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, or CFAP. We're now in CFAP 2. It really depends what you grow, whether the program works for you. It was not written for diversified farms. It was not written for organic farms. It was written for the big players that USDA is used to dealing with. OFA, National Organic Coalition, NSAC, lots of groups spent a lot of time trying to get USDA to improve that program. And I will say in CFAP 2, it is better. It is not fixed. It's not perfect for folks who grow a lot of different things, for folks who are organic or doing something kind of outside what USDA usually pays attention to, but it's better. And the best advice I can give is that people should go check it out for themselves and see if it will work. They have 3 different ways they might pay you, and they have the applications open until beginning of December.
I'm going to jump in here. Yeah. Jeff Shazinski, who's on the call, did a workshop on CFAP 2, and we do have a recording of that, and he's also a good person to turn to for that. He's done some sort of case studies. Jeff, Great. Did you want to comment?
Yeah, I just did a little bit of there was a USDA announcement that $7 billion of the proposed $14 billion has been distributed to date. And while it's not easy from the data they provide, one area that's called the sales commodity area, which is really what people like Judy Oswitz took advantage of. While not perfect, anyway, this has provided relief and can provide relief for organic producers. I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm not saying it's fair, and I'm not saying it's the best way to do it. I'm only saying that, okay, I'll just put it, here's just one example. Judy got 10% of her last year's sales as a relief payment. She's an organic diversified farmer for many years in Whitefish, Montana. People like Doug Crabtree, I saw on the call, they have spelt, they have kamut or Coruscant wheat as being eligible. So products that were heretofore never covered under CFAP 1 are covered under CFAP 2. They're not being used. These folks aren't, I think, aware of it and how relatively easy it is to access. The payments aren't huge, but there are some payments, and they could be taken advantage of. Again, that's up to individuals whether they want to take advantage of it, but I would say that it actually is one of the better things I've ever seen USDA do to provide some element of support through COVID for a greater proportion of agriculture than I've ever seen before.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, I completely agree with that assessment. I mean, round 1, CFAP 1, it was hard to see it working for a lot of folks in our world, but to their credit, they did, lots of groups were going at them saying, you've left people out with how you're doing this. So, it's not the program any of us would design from scratch on a blank piece of paper, but they did absolutely improve it from round 1. And you just have to go look for yourself if it's going to work for you. There's so many different variables, of how everybody's farm is set up. But the best thing I can say about it is that they made 2 main improvements, which we asked for. So we should give ourselves credit and give them credit for making the changes. They made it a better window of time. CFAP 1 was really limited to a couple of months, and they set up different ways to get paid. So like Jeff was talking about, for some folks with a diversified operation, you no longer have to go in and enter every line for every crop, which people just weren't going to do. And you could say in 2019, with this mix, of crops that are on the eligible list, I made this much money, and they give you a percentage, and that's a big improvement over what the first round was. So yeah, just encourage people to go check it out and see that maybe it works for you. And so that's one main piece of the action at USDA from the CARES Act, from what Congress has actually passed on stimulus. And then the second main area you may have heard about was these boxes, this farm to family food boxes. So it's a complicated program. I understand the logic they used when they set it up, because they were trying to solve the problem of, we have this food that's backed up in the supply chain because they, no longer had restaurants to sell it to, or, there were so many disruptions because things shut down, and we have food banks who are, having unprecedented demand. How do we make that connection? So it's kind of a complicated program, but it's a contracting exercise for USDA. They are in their third round of doing this, and it has changed with each round, but basically they put out a contract with somebody who is assembling boxes. So as each round has gone on, it's tended to be bigger players that are doing more of the contracting. So you're seeing some kind of big food distribution type companies doing it, and they're supposed to assemble boxes that meet certain specifications. And the idea is the boxes are pre-packed, and they can be just meat, just dairy, a mix of fruits, vegetables, and dairy, just fruits and vegetables, but they have kind of these categories, and the boxes are supposed to be able to leave the truck and go right into the trunk of somebody's car, because the issue at the food banks was they didn't have labor either. Because of COVID, they couldn't get volunteers in. So it seems to be very variable based on what part of the country you're in, how it's working. In the first couple of rounds, I know some small farm advocates, not necessarily organic, who were doing pastured pork in Missouri, and they got a contract, and they were really pleased with it, because before that they had been all restaurant outlets. They lost those outlets. They had all this pork in the freezer. They got one of these contracts. They found a good way to get it out there. They thought it was great. By round 3, the specs of the contract didn't work for them anymore, and they were kind of too small for the program. So, and then in other parts of the country, it sounds like they gave out some bad contracts, and contracts went unfilled. So there's been a lot of controversy around this program, and we will see how it shakes out. They have just extended it and put more money into it to try to run it till closer to the end of the year. And this is one of the things that the Trump administration is really showcasing as one of their responses, because it's, it's a nice photo op. They're putting food into food banks, and they're saying, it's like a win-win-win program. So those are the two biggies that are running right now, and they are running with money from the CARES Act that was passed in the spring, essentially. And ever since then, we've just been kind of in this endless political battle over what would come next for another round of stimulus. So they're not going to get that done before the election, because the election's next week. They finally admitted that in the last couple of days. So it's not clear when and if that happens. And quite frankly, the politics of that are not really about agriculture. The politics about what comes next on stimulus are about just the price tag in general, how much money each side wants to spend, whether or not some of that money goes to state and local governments. That's a really big sticking point, whether there's going to be like a national COVID testing program versus letting the states run their own. And then there's issues about the Republicans, especially in the Senate, really want there to be kind of broad liability protections for companies that might reopen. The Democrats don't want that. So those are the kind of issues that they are stuck on. And eventually, when they get unstuck on those, there will be an agriculture component of that bill. But the big discussion and the big debate has not been about agriculture. We have OFA, NSAC, lots and lots of groups have been communicating all summer with various offices, saying, when you get to the point of we're writing the agriculture section of this next stimulus bill, here's stuff you could do better. We have lots of ideas that we've put in there, and I'm happy to email Jamie and share those. But at this point, the bigger politics are really driving this thing, not our particular asks on agriculture. And at this point, the soonest you would see it done is after the election in the lame duck, but it's not super clear when and how that's going to happen. So I think for sure we're going to be dealing with these programs at USDA into December, and it's just not very clear what happens next. So I don't know if people had other COVID things they've heard or questions or other ideas to throw out.
I don't want to take you off track from this, but MOA and another organization called Arrow, located here in the state, did put together what we call the Montana Food Providers Project. And we accessed some state funds, state COVID relief funds, and actually have been trying to purchase from organic farmers and ranchers and delivering to organizations that are oftentimes outside of our food bank network. So that's been a productive project, and Becky can speak eloquently on it. But before we get too far, we could stick with your presentation.
No, I think that's important. That's an important point. And so another thing that OFA has been doing, and this is at the urging of our policy committee, we have some people, I mean, no one disagreed, but we have some real champions for this on our policy committee, is we've been trying to really educate members of Congress, people at USDA to say, yes, agriculture writ large had disruptions, but also look at what especially folks who are in the local food system, organic producers, like look at what they've done. They were the fastest to bounce back. They rebuilt local food chains themselves, right? Like people in 2 weeks, people had their farmers markets back open. They figured out how to do social distancing. They figured out, like this community bounced back quickly and served their communities like immediately. So we actually even wrote up a fact sheet about that, which I've been using on the Hill to try to get different congressional staff, because this happens all the time. Agriculture just becomes this monolithic thing. And because Big Ag had a problem, they think everybody had the same problem, or because they don't have a problem, we can't have a different problem. So we're just trying to make that point. And I think that's very much in line with what you all did. In Montana, it was like, you figured it out, right? And you stepped up and figured it out, because this is a much more flexible system than Big Ag is when we're talking about organic folks and people serving local markets. So we're trying to make that part of how we talk about this when we go forward too. So that's enough. That's enough COVID. We're all tired of COVID. But I put it first just because it has become the thing that's dominated our year. So there was no sense pretending that it didn't. But let me give a couple other quick updates of kind of the things we wanted to work on this year. And we still worked on them. We just didn't get to work on them as much as we had thought. So the thing I put down the bottom is almost just a reminder to me that you'll hear me kind of bop between some things we do by talking to the USDA directly. Some things, sometimes we can even, get to the point where earlier in the process, the National Organic Standards Board is setting standards for what organic is going to be. One of your colleagues is on the NOSB and their meeting starts tomorrow, Nate. So, we keep an eye on that process. And then we do also go to Congress, even about USDA standards issues, because they give USDA their money and they do oversight of them. So we kind of have different ways at the same problem sometimes. So you might hear me kind of switch in terms of who I'm talking about and where we were to talk about this issue. So that's why there's usually more than one way to try to move the ball when we're talking about some of these problems. So I'll just do a little highlight on each of these, and if any of them is of particular interest, we can dive in a little further. So if you remember that list of priorities that we've set over the years, it's always been a priority for OFA members. And I give OFA members a lot of credit for making this an issue for the entire organic community. Concerns about fraud in organic supply chains. That's not isolated to imports, but our import supply chains are very risky. These are long, complicated supply chains, and that presents opportunities for fraud if somebody wants to try to take advantage. So, I've been hearing about this since before I started working for OFA. People have been kind of raising the alarm that, especially in the grains sector, there was fraud and it was impacting the price that domestic organic producers could get. Took a while to educate, the USDA's National Organic Program. They kind of slowly worked up to wanting to talk more about it. There was a task force at the NOSB that looked into it. I mean, this has been years and years of advocacy led by farmers, really, to raise this issue. And so in the 2018 Farm Bill, there was a provision that gave USDA a set of activities they had to do. And that led to this rulemaking called Strengthening Organic Enforcement. So since the 2018 Farm Bill, we've been kind of keeping the pressure on USDA, like, how's it going with that rulemaking? Have you finished that rulemaking? Have you written the rule? Where's the rule? So they wrote a proposed rule. It took a long time to get it finished. It sat at the White House review process for a disturbingly long time. And we actually eventually got some members of Congress to start knocking on their door to try to get it out. And they put it out this summer. We just finished a 60-day comment period at the beginning of October. So everybody got to put their comments into that proposed rule. And now USDA is considering those comments. They will incorporate them, make the changes they're going to make based on those comments. And then the next step is they release a final rule. So there's a lot in there. I don't know if any of you chose to dive into it. It was a big, complicated rule. They kind of used the opportunity to bring in lots of other things that had been sitting on their desk that they wanted to finish up and get into rulemaking. So there was a lot of moving parts. I would say the consensus from OFA members and groups we talked to is that we all had suggestions to make it better. We all had very specific suggestions, like, there shouldn't be a waiting period for this. That should happen faster. We want to see a tighter standard here, here, and here, but that we were happy to see it moving. It's long overdue, and we need it finished up, released, and put into effect. There's quite a bit of work in there for certifiers to do. They will have a lot to do once this rule goes into effect. And I think lots of certifiers had comments about that and how long they need and when the effective date should be. Some of the comments that I know OFA put in, and I know some other groups put in as well, as we were encouraging the National Organic Program to give themselves some responsibility and not just say importers have to do this and certifiers have to do that, but we wanted the NOP to talk about what they have as new responsibilities in this situation. So we hope that they'll consider that. But we're happy to see it moving. We want to see it keep moving. And one thing that I am going to flag in a minute when we start talking about moving forward is if we are in a situation where we have a transition to a new administration, right? Depends what happens in the election. This is going to be in their unfinished business pile if you switch from a Trump USDA to a Biden USDA, and we will have to make clear to a Biden USDA coming in that we want this finished. Because sometimes you hear kind of, broad strokes advice, like everything they were doing was terrible, throw it out and start over. We don't want to start this over. We don't have time. We need this to keep moving forward and get finished. So we will be kind of keeping an eye out for that in that scenario, that we have that transition, because too much work went into this and it took too long to get to this point to throw it out and start over. So that's a little unusual from what you might hear in some maybe like the environmental community or other places where they don't really want to continue with any of the rulemakings that the Trump administration was doing. In this case, we're going to say keep this one moving forward. We don't want to start over.
Patty, we have a hand up. Jeff?
Yeah, I just wondered if that whole transition possibility, it could be that, is there anything that you've seen in there that is bad, that at the last minute, the administration may want to push a final rule in a way that garners to whatever interest may not be our interests, because that could also happen. They could rush it and get it out there and claiming it. Although I think I just learned this, there's something about something called the Administrative Procedure Act, that even if a final rule was produced during the lame duck, that 100 days it counts or something, and then the new administration could even bring it up and break it. So maybe it's a moot issue. I was just wondering if there was anything that was bad about this rule that you wouldn't want to see in there that others might want to see in there.
Yeah, it's a good question. If there was one piece they were to just surgically take out, I'd have to think about that, because a lot of this is interdependent. Like, yes, we want, so one big piece of this is that if imports are coming in, they now have to, if this rule goes final, they have to have what's called an import certificate, an electronic certificate, which just gives more information. And hopefully when Customs and Border Protection is looking at it, they understand it's organic. They are doing more things, because right now, one of the basic problems we have is that there's not a lot of understanding at the port what it means when an organic shipment comes. But we need that to happen, as well as a bunch of things that are now would be required for the certifiers about how they certify foreign operations. So I'm not thinking of anything that would be like, if that piece by itself got passed, it would be a poison pill, but you would be losing a lot of the power of like the total package if not everything traveled together, I think would be my first thought. Although I'll think more about it and make sure. And you're absolutely right. Whenever there's a transition, no matter from whom to whom, you got to keep an eye out for funny business from November to January. It's just always an interesting time when we do a transition. So we're going to talk a little bit more of that in a couple minutes, but it's a good question for this enforcement rule. We'll have to think about that a little bit more. So just to keep moving, I mentioned when we talked about priorities, organic dairy, folks, I'm not sure how much dairy you all have in your lives in Montana, but the organic dairy sector has really specific enforcement and standards problems that we've needed to just elevate as their own thing. Oops, sorry, I keep doing that. So it boils down to two main issues. We've seen some progress finally after many years of people pressing them to get the National Organic Program to pay particular enforcement attention to whether or not the pasture standards are being followed. And the controversy there is, our big operations, big dairy operations, actually meeting the intent and the letter of the standard about dairy cows having access to pasture, right? We did that whole exercise of the pasture rule and how do you quantify it and what is the right amount. That was a big ordeal the whole community lived through. So there, over the last year and a half, the NOP is paying more enforcement staff attention to dairy and trying to get out there and do kind of heightened inspections, essentially, to see if that is being followed, especially by big operations. And that took convincing. That took the community really pressing NOP to do that. So we're starting to see the results of that. The other big issue in dairy is something called the origin of livestock rule. This is another one that's been lingering for a long, long time. And it boils down to there are lots of folks who say what's on the books now should be clear. But we have heard that different certifiers have interpreted it differently over the years. Lots of our organic controversies boil down to that. And so for years, there's been this conversation about how do we make clear the standard of what has to happen for an organic dairy animal, for a dairy animal to be transitioned into organic. Lots of operations on the smaller side are saying, you get a one-time transition to do this. Otherwise, after that, you have to do it from the last third of gestation, and you don't get to just automatically transition animals in. And big operations seem to be doing it on more of a continuous basis. And the small folks are saying, hey, that's a disadvantage, right? They're saving a lot of money not raising these animals the whole way through from the last third of gestation. This has been going on for years, this controversy. There was a proposed rule in 2015. It kind of stalled out. It never got finished to become the new regulation. And then, so down at the bottom here, I'm talking about sometimes we use Congress to try to move the agency along. We had agreement, OTA, OFA, NOC, like all the parties agreed that let's get that 2015 rule finished. It may not be our dream scenario, it may not be perfect, but it's enough to get this moving. So we went to Congress, and Congress put instructions in the spending bill, which is appropriations, for the NOP, and they last year, and they said by June of 2020, you need to finish this rule, this proposed rule. So that is a pretty clear instruction. If Congress, who writes you your check to run your agency, gives you a deadline, you should meet that deadline. NOP did not meet that deadline. They did not finish the proposed rule. They're saying they have a legal analysis that they cannot overcome. And we're extremely unhappy with them about that. Lots of groups are extremely unhappy about that. Several members of Congress are extremely unhappy about that. And so we've been working all summer to kind of turn up that heat and try to get them to say what they're going to do next. We are hoping tomorrow, at the NOSB meeting, that they have an update about what they are going to do, because they it's been made clear to them that they missed a deadline Congress sent for them. They need to figure this out. So we're hopeful that tomorrow we get some news about what their plan is to finish this rulemaking, because it's been too long and it is causing economic harm in the marketplace when we don't have it. And so the last three, I think, can be a lot quicker unless people want to talk about them. The certification consistency is just kind of a running theme that keeps coming up when we talk about how NOP is functioning, how are we doing on organic standards, what's going on. And there's lots and lots and lots of issues where if you look at what's on the books, it seems like the regulation is pretty clear, but in reality, we see, you know, a difference with how different operations are, what standard different operations are being held to based on what certifier they use. So a lot of these dairy issues kind of boil down to that. There's an ongoing controversy about transitioning land in greenhouses, the land under a hydroponic operation, and to the point that OFA, NOC, and the Accredited Certifiers Association just did a survey over the summer of certifiers and asked them in 18 or 20 different scenarios, what do you think the standard is? Like, do you have to wait 3 years after a prohibited material was applied? Do you not, based on, you know, and all these very specific scenarios about operating in a hoop house, putting a concrete pad down, like a lot of the things we're hearing about as we see more container operations, more hydroponic operations. And in those 20 scenarios, there were only 2 where we had really strong consensus, and every certifier answered the question the same way. So it showed to us that we do need, and that responsibility is NOP's responsibility. They're in charge of saying that these certifiers are able to go out and be the boots on the ground when it comes to whether organic standards are being followed. So we keep raising that. We raise that even in the context of that enforcement rule, that we need NOP to hold that responsibility and take it seriously, that they provide oversight of the certifiers. And if we want to have the standards being used uniformly and enforced, NOP is the ultimate responsibility for that. So that's a theme that you're going to keep hearing from us and lots of other groups. And there's lots of specific examples of it, but it kind of, a lot of things boil down to that. And so immigration was going to be a bigger issue this year, and it would have been, I think, without the pandemic. So at the end of last year, the House had passed a Farm Labor Modernization Act that could have been better, could have been worse. The fight had moved to the Senate, and then it just didn't happen this year because of the pandemic. So in a new Congress, we will see, depending on who's controlling the Senate and who is kind of going to be the leadership on those issues. But I mean, farm labor problems did not disappear this year in the pandemic. And in fact, there's now all kinds of new awareness we have about farm labor issues because of COVID. So I think that we'll be back. And I think, you know, we'll be looking for people from different parts of the country in particular to weigh in about what that means, because this is one issue where we see a lot of regional differences just because the way people interact with farm labor really varies place to place. And then climate, you know, there's folks who are dealing with it in a climate lens. There's lots of folks dealing with it from a soil health lens, but there's lots of conversations happening either federally or at the state level. And we just want to make sure that organic is part of those conversations, right? We don't want organic agriculture to be left out. If people are designing programs to deal, whether they're looking at it with a climate lens or they're more focused on how do we promote soil health, like organic has to be in those conversations. So in a year that was not so dominated by the pandemic, I think we would have done more on that. But I think going into next year, that for sure is going to be part of what we are lifting up. And I think a lot of other groups will be too. So let me keep us moving, and then I'm happy, again, chime in if you have questions, but just looking forward a little bit. I could have just made a slide with question marks, because at this point, a week before the election, that's pretty much the dominant factor in our lives, is we don't know the answer to a lot of questions, but here's what we know at this point. Obviously, there's an election next week. At some point, we will know the results. So that point may not be next week. So, you know, if we're starting at the top, whoever wins the presidential election, we could be in a situation where we have, you hear people talk about the transition between administrations. The Biden team is not publicly focusing on this. They are publicly focusing on winning the election. It's been a while since we've done one of these. fully, because quite frankly, when in 2016, nobody, including the Trump team, thought they were going to win. So they didn't really prepare in advance. Like, that was pretty clear. And they said that. That's not conjecture. Like, they pretty much didn't have a plan until the day after the election. And then they did a very quick transition process. And before that, we hadn't really done one since 2008. So there is a way this is supposed to go. We'll see if it goes that way. Obviously, it depends who wins the election. But what you will start hearing about when it's clear who won, if you're doing a transition to a Biden administration, there will be an enormous amount of speculation. Lots of it will just be rumors. People will start floating their own name and seeing if it sticks to say, I want to be the Secretary of State. I think so-and-so should be the Secretary of Agriculture. Agriculture tends to be later on that list, right? Like, they do the big ticket ones first, Secretary of State. Because of COVID, you know, Health and Human Services is going to be an early announcement. You know, so they're going to do some of the kind of bigger ticket ones first. Agriculture tends to happen later. There's all kinds of speculation about who it might be. You know, I think it's premature to do any of that. And we also have to keep in mind, and this is something for you all to start thinking about. There's lots of other jobs besides the Secretary of Agriculture that will change if there was a administration change. So there's undersecretaries of various things. For organic, there's an undersecretary of marketing and regulatory affairs. And then under that, there's the Agriculture and Marketing Service. And then under that, so all of those are political appointees and will change. And then you get down to National Organic Program Administrator. That's not a political position, but everybody above that is. And that impacts what we get for organic in that program. And there's lots of other, you know, interim acting advisors, special counsels, confidential assistants who are political employees. And, you know, we need people who think about organic and care about organic in those jobs. So if there is somebody in your orbit, in your State Department of Agriculture, or in somebody's congressional office or a state legislature's office who's ready to like move up to the federal level, think about those people. And after the election, it might be time to suggest to them, hey, you could, you know, there might be new job openings at USDA. There's also jobs that happen at the state level, right? NRCS has state people, rural development have state people. And one of the things we deal with, one of the challenges we deal with as organic is that some of those offices are super familiar with organic and a lot of them aren't. So anytime, if there's somebody in your orbit in Montana who is a friend of organic, we need them to go forth and be involved in lots of parts of USDA, right? So that we have more awareness and more understanding about what organic agriculture is. So that's kind of the top race. Obviously, the president, lots of things flow from whoever wins that election. I don't think we're going to see a change of control in the House. It seems like it's going to stay Democratic, although you never know. But that seems to be what people think. One thing we will see in the House, if we're thinking about, you know, if you're thinking about ag policy, is Colin Peterson is the Democrat who is currently the chair of the Agriculture Committee, and he is in the toughest race he's had in a long time. So we'll see if he comes back. If he doesn't come back because he loses, there's a couple people who are high in seniority on the Democratic side who might become the new chair of the House Ag Committee. And the top Republican on the House Ag Committee is retiring. So we know that there'll be a new top Republican on the House Ag Committee. Nobody from Montana, I don't think, is in the mix for those, but that it does matter for what we do in terms of, you know, moving organic policies forward. It matters who's running the ag committees. And then we're going to see who's running the Senate. So, you know, it seems like that is a tighter, balance. And so a couple of seats could make the difference and flip that to Democratic control. So then we would have new people running those committees. In any scenario in the Senate, we will have a new top Republican on the Senate Ag Committee because Pat Roberts from Kansas is retiring. So whether or not they're the committee chair or the ranking member, there'll be a new Republican on the Senate Ag Committee. And it's probably Senator Bozeman from Arkansas, seems like the contender. And then in terms of timeline, lots of people are like, when are we going to know? When are we going to know who's on the Ag Committee? When are we going to know the schedule for next year? When can we do lobby visits? A lot of that comes, so they'll come back after the election, they'll figure out which party is going to be in control, and then they'll have leadership elections, right? So for the Speaker of the House or the Senate Majority Leader, they'll have those elections, and then a lot of things flow after that. That's when you start to then hear so-and-so is going to be the chair of the committee. this person's going to be on this committee versus that committee. They like some of them like use this as an opportunity to switch committees that they're on. And that's also when we'll get a calendar for next year. So groups like OFA that do a fly-in, although it's going to be virtual in early 2021, but like when we do a lobby day, we kind of have to wait for these calendars to come out to see when are they working, when are they on recess, what are the big breaks. So a bunch of that stuff will start to flow after like mid-November into December. We'll start to get the information that we need. And we just don't know what else they're going to be doing with their time in this lame duck session after the election, before the end of the year. They do need to come back because the government is currently running on what's called a continuing resolution, which means that they failed to pass the spending bills on time on October 1st. And to keep the government running, they kind of give themselves an extension, which is called a continuing resolution. And they only wrote that until December 11th. So they have to come back before December 11th and pass that again, or the government would shut down. So there's a lot of speculation at this point. It really depends who wins what races and what we're looking at. That they'll come back sometime in November. They have to at least pass that continuing resolution, because I don't think anybody wants to shut the government down 2 weeks before Christmas. And maybe in the course of doing that, they find some agreement to pass some new version of a stimulus bill. And we'll see if agriculture is in the mix for that. If it's a big package, there'll be agriculture money. If it was really, really targeted and it was just on COVID testing, or it was just on, small business loans, we may not be in the mix. So all of that is really up in the air at this point, and most of it depends on the election. So let me stop there and see what questions people have or other things they've heard.
Do you want to comment on the cost share dollars, Patty, and what happened there?
Sure. I almost put it on the list and then it was too depressing. So priorities. So that was not on our plan for this year. So I hope people know about the organic certification cost share program, right? It's what it sounds like. If you are a certified organic producer, you can get reimbursement for the year before's expenses up to a point. We've had this program for a lot of years. Every time there's a farm bill, we try to make sure that it gets reauthorized. Every year during appropriations, we try to keep an eye on the money to make sure that it's there. This year, we got an unpleasant surprise. This program is not run by the National Organic Program in its little wing inside USDA. It's run by Farm Services Agency. And things were late this year, and they were blaming the pandemic. They're running other programs. Everything is disrupted, but they were very, very late getting the money out to either FSA offices or some states run the program. It's kind of got a multi-layered setup. They were very, very late getting the money out. We finally got them to get the money out, and they said, oh, we're cutting the reimbursement level this year. So previously and historically, they've always said you could get 75% of your certification expenses up to $750. And that was per scope, right, for crops or livestock or handling. And this year they said, we don't have enough money. We're worried we're going to run short. So we're cutting the reimbursement level to 50% or $500. So to make a long, painful story short, there have been a lot of discussions with FSA about how this happened. How do we get to this point? This was not Congress's understanding when they wrote the last farm bill. This was not anybody's understanding of how this was going to go down. And it's been a very long, painful conversation with FSA, but it boils down to they have some problems tracking the money because of the way that they obligate money, and they say the states have this much to spend, and then they wait to hear back how much the state actually spent. And they are having a lot of lag time where they're not sure how much the states spent. So they have to hold money in reserve in case it all got spent. And therefore they're limiting what they can commit for future years. And it seems like a real administration problem, quite frankly. We've had very, very, very frustrating conversations with FSA about how we got to this point. And the core issue that is most upsetting is at different points, FSA has reported to Congress how they're doing, because they do this in 5-year cycles. The Farm Bill is a 5-year bill. And so they were given this much money to make it last for the 5 years, and they're supposed to report throughout. And it looks like at least once and possibly twice, FSA has told Congress the wrong number about how much money they had in the bank for this program. That does not tend to make people in Congress very happy when they get wrong numbers. And so it has been since August, we have been trying to extract this information, like pulling teeth out of FSA to understand what happened. And so at this point, we are raising it with lots of folks who are in that appropriations process, who are writing the spending bills for USDA. And this is actually a window to do that, because they have to re-up in December because we're running on one of those extensions. So you all do have an appropriator in Montana. Senator Tester's on the Appropriations Committee. We have talked to him. We've talked to his office. We're talking to everybody. If you all wanted to mention that, that would be helpful. So Congress doesn't like to do this, right? They thought they wrote this program for 5 years and they thought they had a plan, and it turns out the plan wasn't holding. But you know, and FSA gave them numbers that turned out to be inadequate. So nobody is happy in this arrangement, but this is a really, really unfortunate way to make the math balance, is by taking it out of the pockets of farmers who already spent this money and historically had been able to assume they were going to get 75% or $750 back. And it's also really important for folks who are starting out, folks who might be smaller, right? Like folks that we want to retain in organic so organic can continue to grow. So it's been a real bummer to deal with this year, but we do need to keep raising it so that, you know, we're pitching it to Congress as like, let's fill this gap for now so that people aren't left, you know, holding the bag for this missing money this year. Let's get through the rest of this Farm Bill cycle. We have 2 more years, and then we need to make some real fixes to this program in the next Farm Bill, which we will convene a larger community conversation about how to fix it. But in the short term, we would like to make sure people get what they got last year, since they were counting on it. So we're kind of pitching, look, there's a short-term fix we could do with more money to kind of fill this gap, and then we need to have a bigger picture conversation about how to improve this program. Has anybody heard much has anybody gone to apply this year for cost share reimbursement and had trouble? Because we're hearing very wildly ranging reports about people getting their money immediately, people not getting money. Some states are saying they've run out. Like we're hearing more trouble than other years from some parts of the country. Oh, Becky, you might be on mute.
In my experience, it's always been a long wait. And so I don't think most of us are accepting anything quickly.
Okay. Does your state do it, or do you have to go to FSA? Every state is different, so I can't keep track.
It's our state.
Okay.
And
people tend to have better experience.
Yeah, last year it was a total of $130,000. And about 50% of our certified organic operations used it.
Oh, good. I tend to hear that it goes better when the state's running it, not FSA. Not always, but that seems to be the case, that people have a better experience when it's the state. But not every state does it. So that's part of our problem, is that it really is variable. Okay. So do people have, I can do a couple different things. I'm not sure how much time people want to spend. I am happy to do more. If people have questions about something I didn't mention, or you remembered a question you had about one of these policy things, we can do that for a while longer, or I can kind of shift to this like advocacy 101 if that's useful. I'm not sure. People may be veterans and not want to do that. I'm not sure how many folks are longtime lobbyists and what's useful. So Jamie, it's up to you. What do you think?
Well, Jeff has a question, so we can start there.
Great.
I just have some general ones. I noted that climate was on your priority. And I'm a pretty active member of the National Sustainable Ag Coalition. And we are working quite hard on a couple of bills that have been proposed and promoting them. I know that, that's hard business, but I'm just wondering if you have actually, since it was a priority in climate, have you looked at these bills? Has the has your organization taken any specific stance on any particular proposed legislation on it?
Yes, and I'm sure there's some we haven't gotten to just because of the craziness of the year, but we endorsed Agricultural Resilience Act, Shelley Pingree's bill. I think there's a lot of momentum around that one, kind of from our sustainable ag universe, right? There's a lot of useful approaches in there. And then she really thought about like existing programs and how do we use those existing programs, right, to make progress, which appealed to everybody. We did not endorse Senator Stabenow's, I always mess up the name, Growing Climate Solutions Act. I don't know if people are tracking this. Senator Stabenow and others that put together a bill, it kind of to put USDA in a position to kind of provide a structure to certify claims about carbon sequestration. It kind of is a facility, like USDA kind of facilitating agriculture being in a market-based solution. And, you know, we would need to spend more time, I think, as OFA to figure out where everybody is on the concept of market-based solutions, right? And whether ag should be in the mix. But setting that aside, there was just some stuff in there that we didn't feel like jived with organic, you know, and gave organic its due in that program. And there wasn't a lot of our folks were concerned there wasn't a ton of rigor for what USDA would approve. It seemed like they would approve a lot of things. So we took a pass on that one. I think lots of these bills will come back up next year. Maybe there's a chance to engage more. And then we also just tried to spend some time talking to both the House and the Senate. The House process was a little more robust, had these committees, like a special committee essentially. And we just tried to kind of feed stuff in there to say, don't forget about organic methods. It doesn't even have to be about certified organic, but don't forget about organic techniques as you're talking about climate, and, you know, soil health has to be part of that conversation. And don't forget about us, kind of was our approach to approaching those committees. So that's kind of what we could pull off this year with everything else going on, but it's obviously going to be in, you know, a discussion going forward. And I think there's lots of OFA members that are kind of looking at their state legislatures, because there seems to be a real robust growing movement for states to look at soil health packages, and that's going to happen faster than the federal. So I think we can share a lot of information there too.
Mo has been involved with a coalition called Grow Montana, and it's more of a food systems, but we've also split off to a soil health. And a study bill has been drafted. That is, and it's, you know, still obviously in flux, but we'll be moving that forward. And Farmers Union also approved that. So we have John Wicks, who sits on their policy committee as well. And so he might be able to speak to that a little bit, but we're doing a little baby steps. John Porterfield has a question about organic wool and the role of sheep in organic systems.
Yeah, I was just curious.
Question.
You know, we're looking for better ways to control weeds. We're looking for a better alternative to convert more farms to organic. And I'm just curious if this is ever an item of discussion out there. What I'm trying to find is that the organic wool is basically owned by Australia and New Zealand. And for the most part, they've given up most of their processing. They've sent it to China. And so there's a huge opportunity, and I just don't know who are the other organic wool producers that are out there. For those that don't know, I bought a wool mill here in Montana, and have converted it and made it safe to operate again. It was built in 1864, most of it was. And anyway, it's got insurance, and we're back and operating. We're making housewares. I'm trying to find ways of using organic wool and organic hemp and blending them through the machinery. And the textile industry is calling upon me to say, where's the organic wool? We need the organic wool with your organic hemp. So Becky, I know we talked a little bit about this, but and Doug and I talked about it at length the other night, but that maybe we're dealing with something that we could really help save an industry. The wool industry needs help. The hemp industry needs help to emerge. And I'd like to make it all organic.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's ripe for, that's got a ton of potential, right? Nothing is leaping to mind of like, oh, you got to call this guy because he's got a bill. I think you're identifying that there's a void there, but organic could fill it. It's super interesting. Yeah, I think there's a research component there, right? To figure out, like, don't forget, I'm sure you all are having this conversation in Montana. Everybody's having this conversation about what does regenerative actually mean? Like, everyone's using the word regenerative, but what does it mean? And how does organic fit with it? And livestock need to be part of that conversation, right? Like having livestock on farmland, not just what are your crop methods, right? So, and when we have that conversation, that we remember all kinds of livestock, right? Including sheep, so there's one piece there. Maybe there's things to be thinking about with research agendas, like what are the right organic methods? How do we measure them? What are the benefits, right? That might be one area. And then like everything, right? I know you all are involved in meat processing, capacity, infrastructure. We need to rebuild these links in the chain conversations. It sounds like there's a wool processing infrastructure conversation. That could be super interesting, maybe at a state level, maybe at a federal level. So I don't have a snappy answer for the one, the one thing we could do, but I think there's real potential there to kind of get people together. I'm actually personally on the board of NOFA New York, which is Northeast Organic Farmers Association of New York, and another board member does wool as well. So I think nationally there is a not huge community, but I think people are thinking about this. I wonder if there's a way to convene some people and start brainstorming about this.
Yeah, I think, John, in Montana, there has not been an outcry of producers who want a market for their organic wool, because there are not, right at the moment, I don't know that there's any certified organic producers besides me. And the mainstream wool grower community, those are the people you should probably talk to. They usually have their annual meeting in December. Yeah. And they have pretty much been disinterested because they are leery of the O word for political reasons. And because it's kind of complicated when you're moving your sheep around grazing on other people's grain stubble or buying hay to fully address the organic feed issues. It certainly could be done, but I think going to the Montana wool growers is really the place to start.
Yeah, I'm a member of the Montana wool growers at this time, and I'll certainly have the discussions. Their conference is the same dates as ours, so I'll be in Billings and taking kind of back and forth between our MOA conference. But we want to try to find out what the resistance is and really what the advantages could be to actually converting to organic. It seems like of all the producers, there are 150 or more growers, and they all could be organic. And it just seems like we're giving up a huge market by not even competing, not even offering an organic wool source. I would love to be stuffing my pillows with organic wool. I'm using conventional wool and washing it the same way, but it's a chain of custody, and I can put a little barcode on each pillow, actually, that'll tell me all the way back to where the farm came from, both for the hemp and for the wool. So I want to show and be able to have that verification to a lot of the industry that I'm seeing fraud in. There's the fraudulent products that are coming back from China that are supposedly organic. You can put a fire to it, you can put a flame to it, and they'll melt, which means they blended it with a polyester. So I want to see these industries grow, and it would really help, I think, Montana and the Montana Organic Association.
Yeah, this could be off the wall because I'm not there. You all know better. But this also kind of sounds like a topic that sometimes depends on your relationship. But if there's somebody kind of at your land grant or somebody who's thinking about these kind of like ag economic development questions, because this is kind of this multi-pronged approach, right? Like you need the processing, you need to identify the market. Like this seems like kind of a good case study for somebody who's thinking about those like food shed kind of issues. I don't know if there's any scrappy grad students out there that could convene people and kind of start a conversation.
Would be a good topic for growth, Montana growth. The Growth Through Montana project. They have a grant program. If you get the right people together, some people from there, that's a funding source for something like that. Grow Montana. What do they call it?
Growth Through Ag.
Yeah, Growth Through Ag. I know, yeah, those grants, I've used those in the past for organic market development issues.
Yeah, probably don't want to take Patty too far off track right now on this topic.
Right.
It's interesting though. I mean, I think that this is why I like organic though, because y'all are always thinking, you don't have these conversations in conventional circles all the time, right? It gets, you guys are problem solvers, which I like. Yeah, so are there other kind of, I'm flexible. I don't want to make people suffer through a presentation they already know. If people want to do kind of like Advocacy 101, I can do it kind of fast in case it lights any fires, or we can keep chit-chatting about policy stuff. It's up to you guys.
I had one more just quickly. If you, you probably doesn't sound like you did, but the NSAC did do a transition document. They just passed it. NSAC did, and we were part of that. And so, are you guys planning anything like that for your organization?
Yeah, we are. NSAC has a little more structure than we do, a little more staff, but we are working on it. In fact, I'm working on that this week. So technically, as a C3, we wouldn't hit send on it anyway, because like the IRS doesn't like you talking to them unless you have a clear winner. So I'm giving myself this week to write it, and then we'll discuss it with the policy committee, and then we'll send something in. So a lot of the things that we talked about tonight are going to be on there. Like we need this strengthening organic enforcement rule finished. Don't throw that baby out with the bathwater. If we're talking to a new Biden administration, I didn't get into some of the other rules that have been lingering. There's something called the Organic Livestock and Poultry Practices, which is animal welfare standards. We need that done. Like there's a list of kind of lingering standards issues that will be, in our memo to a new administration saying this is what you have to prioritize, and kind of this mindset of enforcement, right? Providing oversight of the certifiers, things like that. And if we go to the trouble to write it and there isn't a transition because Trump wins the election, we'll just turn it into a letter and say, hey, this is what you should focus on for your next term.
Maybe rather than go through Advocacy 101, since I think all of us have been involved with lobbying at some level, maybe what do you need from MOA besides, I already know we have great representation from Bob and Becky and Nate. What would be helpful for MOA to do for OFA?
Oh, I love that question. I didn't even set you up for that. Yeah, this is helpful. I'm happy to check in whenever it makes sense, because this is actually really useful for me sitting here in Washington, D.C. to say, I was talking to people and this is the need they identified, right? This is, this is what I'm hearing on the ground. So we hear that from Becky and Nate, but I'm happy to pop in occasionally. You have my info you can share with people. I can put it in the chat too. So whether it's like new ideas, like we were just talking about, like here's a situation on the ground nobody in DC was thinking about, organic wool, or I'm also, if it's appropriate, would love occasionally to say, hey, how are you guys doing on cost share? What's happening on the ground in Montana? Like, is it working? Is it not working? Because it is, I'm not going to surprise anybody, but sometimes it's hard to get the real deal of like how the programs are actually working when I'm talking to people inside USDA or talking to people on the Hill. So this is super useful to be able to do this. You all do have some important members of Congress, right? Senator Tester is important because one, he understands this, right? Because he is an organic farmer, and two, he is on the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. And I say that word a lot because that's a lever that we use a lot. These are the bills that give USDA their money to spend. And if there are instructions that come along with that bill, we hope they will listen to them, right? So we use that process quite a bit. So that is important that you all have somebody on that particular committee. Yeah, those are the biggies that come to mind, is just kind of staying in touch and letting us know if there's particular things you're seeing, or if we are trying to get a read on something, how it's working. And also for MOA to be in touch with Senator Tester and the rest of your delegation, but also you as individuals. I think you all in Montana, in a state like Montana, have more kind of like retail politics contact with your members of Congress than lots of other states. Like you guys get more FaceTime. when they go out and about and they visit farms and things like that. So I think you all actually have a lot more access than farmers I talk to in other states. So if you can, in more normal times when things are easier, you know, host somebody to come see your organic wool operation, like that might be the first step towards like convening that conversation where we, you know, come up with a research project or just like getting them out there to see what you do. I think sounds easy, but it is actually super impactful.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question, and this is sort of a question for Bob Quinn too, in your long-term perspective of what you thought OFA was going to be. You know, when I look at OFA's list of policy priorities that Patty put up in the beginning, and, you know, through all these discussions, this came up yesterday in the farmer panel too with NOSB meeting. There's all kinds of important topics that NOC and NSAC and OFA and everybody's been working on about fraud and cost share and hydroponic. You know, these are all important policy issues. But I confess that my personal bias or I guess I tend to gravitate to some different questions. And particularly in light of the pandemic and the semi-catastrophic condition agriculture seems to possibly be in the next coming decade. Bob, I guess I'd like to hear from you and also kind of from a different perspective from you, Patty. How do you see the organic community playing a role in moving the needle on agriculture more generally? I mean, I think everybody in agriculture is concerned about having a level playing field, which the Farm Bill makes it pretty tough. And it's been super easy for a bunch of policy wonks to, you know, justifiably get absorbed in these smaller policy decisions and enforcement things and so on and so forth. But I can't help but feel like all those good works are not gonna come to fruition unless we work on the big picture of running a nation that's full of mostly corn and soy and little else when you look at it with broad strokes. And I'm just wondering if you have thoughts about that, Bob, since you were in on the ground floor of this whole thing. And Patty, I guess I'm wondering if you see any potential pathways when you step back away from your day-to-day job, do you see any pathways that we might more effectively engage in the discussion in that way? I know these are things that John Tester and Bob Quinn have thought about for much of their careers, but it sometimes gets shunted aside because it seems so impossible. And so I get that.
Well, I'd like to say right now, I think that with this pandemic, we are in a very fantastic position to hold up high nutrient dense food as a solution, or at least a protection for disease. You know, everybody's afraid to do anything, waiting for a vaccine to show up. Well, flu vaccines are like 40% effective. They're not, even if we have a vaccine, it's not going to be the answer. It's a Band-Aid effect. We never go to the root of the problem. And with organic, particularly with regenerative organic, we go to the root of the problem. The root of the problem is the soil, and focusing on that rather than focusing on how to feed our plants and get higher yields and not care about what kind of nutrition comes out of them. And I think what comes out of most organic operations is higher in nutrition, and therefore gives people a better health. And now's the perfect time to really blow that horn. It's not, if you look at the healthcare crisis in America, it doesn't matter what kind of healthcare program there is, and it doesn't matter what parties control. If a significant percent of the population is chronically ill, we're going to go bust. And organic agriculture has a solution for that.
So how do you see OFA helping to promote that concept? Or do you see a way that OFA?
Well, sure. I think we should talk about it, and every time we meet with Congress, we should bring that up and say, and by the way, we have a solution for the biggest problems in America right now, and the one that's forefront is disease. But we also have other problems that we have a mediation for climate change. because of carbon sequestration. We have an answer for contamination of pesticides in our environment. We have glyphosate in our rain. We have a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico as big as New Jersey. How bad does it have to get before we do something about it? We have children that can't drink the water in Iowa. Regenerative organic has all the answers for that. And I think that those are the things that we should focus on a little more. But the biggest driver I see is reconnecting food and health. And if we are focusing on growing good food, which we are, I think we should ask for help with research to substantiate that and demonstrate that it really is the way to go. One thing I was going to mention to Patty is that we're having our MOA conference. You probably already know about it in December. It's virtual this year, but when it's in person, we'd sure love to have you come. But those are good opportunities to hear what's going on in the state. I don't know how many others you're touching base with around the country, but I think that's a really great way to touch base. One thing that I've tried to do, and I haven't done it just as a member of MOA, but as an organic farmer, tried to get myself appointed to advisory committees for congressional people. I've been on Greg Gianforte's Ag Advisory Committee. I'm the only organic farmer there. You can imagine what fun that is sometimes, but it's still an opportunity to raise some issues by people in front of people who don't hear them very often. And I think the more we can do that, the easier it will be to garner friends and advancement in our causes. So the big cause that I've been pushing is the research at USDA of trying to, it's not certainly not in the top 5 of the policy things, but we've talked about it in different policy levels of, and we have it in our policy discussion this year of having the research for organic at least equal the amount of sales of organic in the country. That's about 6%. That would be a 6-fold increase over about 1% they are now. And that's a very reasonable thing to ask for. I think we should look for reasonable things that are almost self-evident. And health and food is one of them, Becky, and that's why I would really start with that and pound that drum really loud right now, because we have answers that aren't being discussed. Again, it's the problem that big pharma is in control and the ones that are going to make the most money off all this. With our chemical companies, they're the ones that are making the most money off of ag programs. And so no one really we're at a disadvantage of getting a time and opportunity to speak out for organic in general because of the opposition we have that people are making more money with chemical agriculture. So I think that's what we're facing, but it's no reason to be quiet. It's more reason to not be quiet. So I don't know if that's what you're looking for, Becky, but those are some general.
Well, I mean, I certainly agree with you totally on all those issues. I'm just struggling to understand the specific ways that OFA can help advance that needle. And the hurdles that you describe are well understood, but
yeah. I think we just need to talk about it. Why can't we talk about it every time we're invited somewhere? We mentioned that. We mentioned there's more and more scientific evidence now of the nutrient-dense quality of organic food, which surpasses non-organic food. And I think we should talk about that.
Well, I totally agree with you, but I also think that if you were to go interview a lot of members of Congress, they would say, oh yeah, my wife feeds organic food to our kids. But then if you ask them, so are you going to create a different farm bill next time around? They say, oh, that's a large immutable object with bipartisan support. We'll never change that. And that's, I guess, I mean, every member of Congress should have a copy of your book sitting on their desk, or their bedside table maybe. And I think a lot of people kind of understand your message. Certainly mothers across the country understand your message, but we're not translating that to mega USDA policy. Anyway, I'll get off my horse. You guys know I'm obsessed with this, and I'm just struggling to figure out how we can actually move the needle.
Yeah.
Thanks. Jeff, did you have another question? Jeff?
Yeah, I would like to add just that, you know, everything I agree with too. I think that partly maybe it's inward too with the organic movement. I am stressed somewhat of different segments of the organic community, OTA and others, in terms of our cohesiveness and messaging. And in part, it does even, and I noticed Bobby quickly picked up the term regenerative agriculture, and everybody wants to use this regenerative word now. It just harkens back to my start many, many, many years ago when we fought for and continue to fight over the word sustainability. And I just don't want to go down the road of another having 30 years of fighting about what the word regenerative means. And I just want to stick with organic rather than regenerative in that case, even though I would, I do recognize that Robert Rodale is actually the progenitor of that term, which most people don't even know, but who are now using it. But I see such, I mean, if you're getting into politics, you got to get into the corporate interests. Their willingness to fudge and use regenerative and then not really and hold them strongly to what the hell they actually mean by that. I find too much scapegoatism in this. I don't know if anybody ever watched the movie that just came out of Kiss the Ground. And there are parts of that that is wonderful, and there are parts of that that just want to make me scream. Part of it is that Ray Echeverria is highlighted so, and I know I meant the man, and I know him, and I'm not saying he's a bad person, but there's this co-optation that always is going on to make our message less. And we have to fight that these are you know, that we have the best legal definition of a production system, you know, that is good for the climate, good for the environment, good for health, good for all these good things that we all know. And yet we don't, we see this kind of always a dilution. And I think it's because we don't stand stronger together across NOC and all these different organizations. That's my spiel.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff.
The reason I think that it's important to talk about regenerative is because people are co-opting this and claiming it's fantastic to do no-till and just use a little glyphosate, and they're bringing that up so that's better than organic. That's how they're selling it. And I think Monsanto and Bayer and all their buddies are behind some of this. And I on the other hand, that there's a big amount of those people supporting regenerative that think it should be tied to organic. And a lot of our efforts in organic is we don't use the word so much, but that's what we're trying to do. And the things about hydroponics, the things about pasture rules with cattle and whatnot. It's a lot of stuff with regenerative that they were trying to get that concept was part of the organic movement from the beginning. We called it sustainable, and you're absolutely right about that. In the beginning, we didn't use the term, but it was the same, very similar concept. Sustainable was a very similar concept. And so I don't want to be left out and passed by a new fad without tooting our horn about this. And we're the original regenerative folks, actually, most of us. I mean, there's some industrial organic around, and we see that with industrial confinement systems and being able to say they're organic and some of this garbage. But the main flow of this movement is still what we would recognize as or describe as regenerative organic, in my mind.
How about a bumper sticker? Organic agriculture, the best regenerative system out there.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Yeah, and I don't have a problem.
Co-opt them, don't let them co-opt us.
Yeah, yeah.
And always point out that Robert Rodale was the original user of that term. Every time they
yeah, of course, and Rodale continues to lead with the regenerative organic certification. I'm frustrated we have to go through another certification, but they're the ones leading that. I did have a question for Patty, though. Patty, you mentioned your cooperation with several groups. Are you also on pretty good terms and pretty close with OTA with their lobbyists and their activities too?
Yeah, and I would say some of the, this year, I have to hope this year was not typical, right? We had bigger plans for a lot.
Yeah,
and Becky,
of course.
100% where you are. I mean, I am very interested in like, how do we use organic as a way to fix what's broken, right? And like holding up organic as like, one, we can do it a different way. Like we have proven, this is not an idea of an alternative, like this is a viable sector that's thriving, and that's a contrast to big conventional ag, right? And we did have a plan with the 2 months I was the policy director before the pandemic hit. Everything went to hell. We did have a plan. We wanted to do a lot more of these advocacy kind of like brainstormings and trainings, because you all are the best spokespeople we have to make exactly these points, right? And how do we get organic farmers out there saying, no, we don't have to farm this way. No, we don't have to have a farm bill that looks like that. So like, we really do want to do more of that in 2021, where we're like putting that out there, because I think there's nobody more credible to policymakers, consumers, reporters, whoever, than organic farmers, right? To show that we can do it a different way. Where we have made some progress this year has been because we have been working together. So NFU, National Farmers Union, right? We have a Montana Farmers Union person. We are in good alignment with National Farmers Union folks on their organic policy, OTA, National Organic Coalition, and SAC. And so it used to be more regular. The pandemic kind of screwed that up, but we do get together and say, on this original livestock, we worked pretty well together. Hasn't yielded the results we want yet, but we are coordinated and working together. I would say the improvement from CFAP 1 to CFAP 2 was because everybody was really beating on USDA with the same critique about the way they did that first program. And I think that was again, we were starting, wasn't what I wanted to spend my time on this year, but we did make progress because people were coordinating. And we did have some really good coordination this summer on the original livestock, because everybody wants that done. It's ridiculous that we're still fussing with this. So yeah, but Becky, I completely 100% agree with you. Like, I did not want to spend the time I spent the last 3 months on cost share. We shouldn't have had to do that, right? And that was time we weren't spending educating Hill staffers about why organic is different, right? So we have to figure that out as a balancing act. And the other thing I will say to make a pitch for the OFA process is, we're getting ready for next year. People can propose policy proposals, and you all can lobby each other about what those top 5 priorities are. Like I have to, for my job, I need to like stick to those 5 priorities, right? Like I can't go freelancing. But if there was more on there that was about what is the market structure in organic, are people making money, right? Like we could work on that. There are efforts that OFA could join. If there was more on there about, genetic contamination, like we could join efforts that are out there. So I think there's room in that policy process for y'all to lobby each other a little bit and maybe move the needle up that way, because I would happily work on that stuff. And we have policy on it. I think we have good agreement. It's just hours of the day and like what's rising to the top for people. So I think that's a conversation we need to start having about like, what is the right balance of like day-to-day standards and big picture, using organic as a lever to like fix agriculture. And it sounds like I feel that tension as well. I'd be happy to have that conversation. I think we should have it on the governing council and in the policy committee and think about maybe how we balance that, because the day-to-day stuff will consume us. We know this, that's how life works, right? So we might need to be more deliberate and set aside, X amount of time we want to keep free for the big picture stuff.
How about if we had a top 8 or a top 10 instead of just a top 5?
Then they need to move me from half-time to full-time.
I would be glad.
This is a half-time gig for me, so let's happily get there.
Well, they could be on the list. You just don't need to spend a lot of time there. But I think it's a challenge to pick 5. It's a challenge to pick 5. And I would really encourage, I'm not making trying to make light of that, but it would be nice to have a list of what also is important. Because a lot of times the big picture stuff doesn't make the top 5, because the top 5 is really the noise that's getting the immediate, attention. And rather than the bigger picture, more calmer, slower deliberation type stuff. But it's really important to talk about where we want to go in the next 20 years, rather than where we're going to go by Christmas.
Right.
So anyway.
Yeah, that's the eternal tension we all deal with resources, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
I think seeing climate move up there, I think is actually good. I think that's the ultimate big picture issue, right? And I think the fact that
and we have a big solution for climate. We do. We can have. Yeah, I think so. That's good.
And speaking of resources, we are over an hour and a half time, which is outstanding. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Patty, so much for your time and your sharing your knowledge and for inviting us to participate as we can. This session will be is being recorded and will be available by the end of the week on our YouTube channel and on our website. Feel free to share it as you will. So thank you, everyone, for attending. And yeah, Patty, we look forward to seeing you in person one of these days.
Oh, I would love to get out there.
Yeah.
So I put my email in the chat, and Jamie has it, and Becky has it. So feel free if you have ideas or you want to hear more about the policy process next year or whatever.
Great, thank you. Good job. Welcome.
Very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yep, bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye, Bob. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, thank you. Hey, this is really good. This is a good idea. Is this your idea?
This is all we can do. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's good. I like it.
It's actually part of our conference offerings. Rather than pile the schedule with too much, we spread it out. So
yeah, that's fine. I think that's fine.